What's to be done when it's midnight in the century? That's the question posed by Victor Serge, one of my all-time favorite novelists who I want to discuss with you. And Victor Serge lived in the midnight in the century, which is pretty much the 1930s, where his dreams of the Bolshevik Revolution were crushed by the Stalinist regime, and his dreams of international revolution, particularly in Germany, were crushed by Adolf Hitler. Victor Serge was born in Belgium in about 1890, 1891, and he was born to Russian exile parents who were enemies of the Tsarist regime and therefore not very much welcome back in their home country. So he grows up mostly self-taught, or also by his father. He lives in grinding poverty. One of his brothers dies, I believe at 4 or 6 years old. And Belgium at this time is, of course, an imperial power. It is expanding, especially in the Congo, and its working class lives in utter misery. So it's kind of easy for someone of his background to join anarchist and socialist movements, which is what he does, although he gravitates more towards anarchism. He moves to France, and around 1911 or so, he becomes a newspaper editor, and he defends the infamous Bonnet Gang, who are anarchists, and they claim to be expropriating for the people when all they really do is rob banks and kill people. And he defends them just because they're comrades, and he doesn't turn against them, and he's actually sent to French prison for 5 years, about 1911, 1912. Not because of anything he did, just because of what he said. And he actually documents that in a novel called Men in Prison, very easy to remember title. After his release from prison, 1916, 1917, he goes to Spain, and he takes part in an abortive anarchist uprising. And this era is a very tense one in Europe. You have World War I, you have the Russian Revolution, and within a few years you'll have revolutions throughout Eastern and Central Europe, in Germany, in Hungary, etc. With the Russian Revolution, he becomes enamored. He moves to Russia after spending another year in a French internment camp. He spends a lot of time in prison, you can tell. And in Russia, he joins the Bolshevik Party, he becomes a commissar, and he becomes pretty much a committed Marxist, although he does not so much forego his anarchist beliefs as transform them. He becomes a defender of persecuted artists, politicians, and denounces excesses of the regime. So it's very easy for someone of his background to denounce state and bureaucratic repression, although he doesn't quite do that at first. With the ending of the Civil War in, say, 1920, he accepts assignments abroad in Germany during the Ruhr crisis, where $1 is worth about 1 trillion Reichmarks, which shows you about how much the currency is worth. And there's an abortive revolution there, which he documents in a book called Witness to the German Revolution. He moves back to Russia about 1925-26. He takes his position in the Trotskyist left opposition, which is fight the bureaucrats under Stalin, and for a return to the roots of the revolution, which unfortunately for him and millions of others does not happen. He's in turn exiled to a remote portion of Siberia, and of course Trotsky and others are either executed or exiled. In Trotsky's case, exiled. And he spends another 5-6 years in prison until, say, 1936. But he has contacts abroad who actually agitate for his release, and he gets out. During his time in prison, though, he wrote 3 novels. Men in Prison, Birth of Our Power, which is about the Spanish uprising, 1917. He writes Conquered City about the Russian Civil War. Before prison, he had written Year One of the Russian Revolution. After his release, he ends up back in Belgium, living in dire poverty, and he writes Midnight in the Century about Trotsky's prisoners, the case of Comrade Tuliev, which is about the Stalinist purges which are taking place around this time, and The Long Dusk, which he actually writes about the beginnings of the French resistance during World War II. And Serge is involved with Trotsky and the international opposition, which is actually hounded by police in democratic and fascist countries, is pretty much suppressed in the Soviet Union, and he eventually breaks with Trotsky because he defends the POUM in Spain, who Trotsky denounced as opportunists who he didn't think were actually revolutionary. And that's kind of a tragedy because they never actually have a chance to reconcile because Trotsky has sat pesky ice pick in the back of his head. And Serge actually makes his way to France, and with the onset of the occupation by Germany and Vichy, he ends up in Mexico, where he spends the last 7 years of his life until 1947, when he dies penniless. During that time, of course, he wrote this Case of Comrade Tulieff. He also wrote his memoirs of a revolutionary, which are a fantastic autobiography and history. And he even writes a biography of his old friend Trotsky, with Trotsky's wife. Now, Serge dies pretty much of a heart attack. He has nothing to his name, and he's pretty much hounded by the press. He did write a last novel called The Unforgiving Years about pretty much the Comintern spy network in Europe and about World War II, which was only published in February by New York Review Classics. Fantastic book. Now, I talk about Victor Serge not only because he's one of my favorite novels, not only because he's a great poet, but because he really is someone who lived through a time of great darkness, a time of the midnight in the century. He never forsook his beliefs. He never gave up. And let's face it, with all this pressing down on you, that's pretty damn easy to want to give up. But he persevered, and there's actually a biography of him, which is named after one of the titles of his poems called The Course Is Set on Hope. And I believe that's what he embodies. He embodies a hope. He's a great poet, revolutionary, and I think you should read him. I think he should be assigned in all schools, but I don't set that kind of policy. So I just want to express my appreciation for him and hopefully get the word out there. So, send off. This is Spartacus, signing off.